Liberal Zionism is something in which is the inner branch of Zionism, as I covered with this by talking about Christian Zionism. If the sound is not as good as before, it's because it's late and I'm in a new place, so it's not completely done yet, but there's enough stability that I can get stuff done in my room. Nevertheless, let's start. The Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong made some very disturbing comments regarding Israel, which I think need to be addressed, which fall into the liberal Zionism element. And as for why it's liberal Zionism, let's go back to part 1, and I'll explain why, because it fits the categories of endorsing Zionism as per Zionists' interpretations. Okay, and with that, let us begin. I think liberal Zionism is then worth talking about, because liberal Zionism, like liberalism generally politically, is the worst system. Because, for example, with like the hardline fascist Zionists and the Christian Zionists, you know where they stand. You know they want a completely Jewish state where there's segregation. But with liberal Zionists, they disguise their intent, and that is the issue. What makes one thing connected between liberal Zionists and Christian Zionists as well, which is regardless of their intention and practice towards the aims of promoting Zionism, is both liberal Zionists as well as Christian Zionists ultimately will default into supporting the status quo of more fascistic Zionism. First cover this topic, I'll be following what Sally Katliski said. Israel is showing these fantasies of liberal Zionism, which is a very true statement as well, especially as of late, because in part 2, I covered more specifically the nation-state law of 2018. This was covered here as well. For example, it says this. To begin with, Israel has recently intensified its assault on Palestinian life. It has stepped up its demolishing of Palestinian homes. It is deliberately terrifying midnight raids on Palestinian families and its brutalization of Palestinians at checkpoints in schoolyards, in olive gardens, and on pastoral hillsides. And the Palestinian men, women, and children at a rate of more than one every single day so far this year. That highlights the issue here. The issue is not necessarily about Hamas. Regarding Palestine, it never was about Hamas. To explain why Hamas isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all of this problem, it continues to say, this point here, I won't read all of it, because it's an interesting article. You should read it yourself if you can. The point is, though, this point around liberal democracy. What has changed, however, is the Israeli state disavowal of the conventional form of denial and mystification and underpinning the myth of what is often called as liberal democracy. And what is a problem for many liberal and leftist elites in Europe and above all the United States, because they have clung to the myths for decades to justify their unwavering support for Israel, with the Israeli government feeling this state's political nature more nakedly than ever. Liberals pro-Zionism are the last to be confronted with the reality that they have tried to deny for so long. And that reality is, Zionism itself cannot be met equally much with compassion or human rights. It's a very interesting dilemma in which people who are not pro-Zionist don't have to deal with, but Zionists have to deal with themselves. As said here, liberal self-deception around Israel has been much more challenging since at least 2018. That is when the Israeli parliament passed the Jewish nation state law, as mentioned in part 2, which made formal and explicit ways of racial discrimination against non-Jews that are being yada yada yada. And this is where it gets really interesting, because I do wonder how a lot of these liberal Zionists will defend it. And I won't rant on about this point, because I will be getting on to Penny Wong next, because her comments around it shows a denial about this fact. Ahmed in this article ultimately correctly points this point out about Israel and Zionism specifically. Israel has long drawn its legacy amongst Jewish communities around the world by presenting itself as a safe haven for the Jewish people that can protect them from hostility and genocide. The judgment of the establishment of Israel gave Jews, such as their fathers and grandfathers, a sense of pride and comfort. This has been seen by liberal Zionists as moral justification for the existence of Israel, and that's kind of a problem, because it doesn't work that way. The Jews are the lowest religious population in the world. So, as I pointed out in other stuff, it's also very bad that they want to present themselves as protectors of Jews. But in this moral justification has been one great weakness: the Palestinians and the injustice, displacement, and death that they have suffered, so that European Jews would feel safe. Early liberal Zionism sought to erase the existence of Palestinians and their suffering, propagandizing the myth that Palestine was a land without a people for a land without a land. A people without a land, sorry. I'm still a little bit tired. I'm still fine doing this. And that is my point about that. I will now get on to Penny Wong's statement. Regarding Penny Wong herself, this is what was said in 11th of October 2023. As you can see, Senator Penny Wong, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Australia. So, what she says is really quite critical, because in terms of what this would be dealing with in terms of logistics, politically, it would be Foreign Affairs, which would then go to Prime Minister, and Prime Minister decides, yada 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 yada. Anyway, start the beginning of this by pointing out one irony here, which I will point out later. Acknowledging traditional owners of this land, which is accustomed to do, you say in the speeches here in general. But here's the thing: one comment she will make very soon afterwards would kind of disprove against that very principle, essentially by endorsing the Jewish nation-state law in effect. I will go over this little by little. Instead of discussing our international engagement, we saw it in the shadow of barbaric attacks on Israel by Hamas. Let's go little by little here, shall we? In the shadow of barbaric attacks, calling Palestinian resistance barbaric, attacks on Israel, which I guess is technically correct. These attacks are abhorrent, they are acts of terrorists, they cannot be justified. And that's where the pro-Israeli element of Penny Wong is really annoying, because liberal Zionists, or people who want to support the Israeli state themselves, don't get this point. They do not understand that if it's not Hamas, it'll be some other entity. For example, using this logic here, it says this: Australia stands against terrorism. We stand in solidarity with Israel. We unequivocally condemn the attacks by Hamas. But, and as you can see, Branham uses semantics. What makes this a Zionist argumentation is, if I was left at that, I'd call it something else entirely. But this is where here that's important. I reiterate, Israel's right to defend itself. More Jews were killed on Sunday on this day than any day since the Holocaust. And this is what I was talking about with the myth about they want to promote. The issue here is those people would not be there if not for the colonialism. Those people also, you can't guarantee, are completely innocent either. Let's continue, shall we? I won't go over this because it's stupid. Because it's to please Israeli Zionists. Just as we stand with Israel, we stand with the Australian Jewish community. We will do everything we need to do in order to keep that community safe. People come to Australia because they want to live in a country that's peaceful, tolerant, and respectful. But this is the thing. If you want, this is what I find funny. Peaceful, tolerant, and respectful. That is the opposite of what Israeli politics is trying to seek nowadays. Yet they want to preach it here. And I won't just go over everything because there's some other very, very weird logic by this. So I will leave it on this note. And I hope you got the point that they're using support for Israel in very, very bizarre ways. And then we have things like this. Penny Wong urges Israel to listen to friends and warns world won't accept continuing civilian death. And this is where the issue is. This is the peak hypocrisy I'm talking about here when talking about liberal Zionism. Again, let's break this down. Penny Wong urges Israel to listen. Okay, listen. To friends and warns world won't accept. To friends. That would imply Penny Wong is pro-Israel or pro-Zionist in some sense and continuing the government legacy of supporting Zionism. Won't accept continuing civilian deaths. This could then lead to some thinking that Penny Wong is trying to stand up for the Palestinian people, but this is dead wrong. Because when he said listen to friends when talking about Israel, that means you're not actually saying anything against the apartheid state itself. To further clarify this point, it says it's a very, very pathetic state she is trying to do. She's trying to balance it out between the two factors here, between trying to look like a figure that's pro-Israel, but also for the civilians in Palestine, which is not Hamas, which is a position to try and have optics, but itself as a position is weak because the actual situation is bad in general. For example, in this article it says, "We believe we speak for vast majority of Australians of all faith and of none. When we say we stand in solidarity with Jewish Australians at this time." Again, why does Jewish Australians have to do anything about this? This is specifically about a ethno-state by Zionism using Judaism to promote a terrible idealism. There's nothing necessarily linking this to the extended Jewish community. Is there potential that some might spill out into it? Sure, but if that's the case, some people may hate me for saying this. They might deserve it. The point is to say that afterwards, by saying, likewise we stand too with the Australian Palestinian communities whose families are dying and suffering in this terrible conflict. But you don't care then, do you? Because if you are literally saying we stand in solidarity with the Jewish Australians at this time, while also saying, oh, we too stand with the Australian Palestinian community, that is to marginalise and outline it as to say the Palestinians don't really matter. And to prove this point, it goes into more interesting dynamics because of another topic which was covered by another article, which was done by an anonymous user, probably to protect themselves given the nature of their article. As a direct result, if you are listening to this point, I'm sure you realise that this point in that Penny Wong is conflating Zionism or Israeli politics as more defendable, and thinking that Australia needs to stand for it. The final aspect of this part will be this article, as this is what we all have the energy to do today. This morning, because we've been working very early in the morning. Anyway, but this will round off my point very well. May 9th, 2023. How Labour is failing Palestine. Again, as I said, anonymous author. For example, one of my concerns is this is covered here, which I will link to you. Is this a login thing? No, it's not. So this is accessible to everyone. For example, one point in this, which is really good, is actually very, very clear. And that is this point of her both Zionist approach to colonizing military superpower backed by the US and the resisting indigenous population is a reflection of her and her party's politics. And that's why I said it's ironic. They said respect for the First Nations people and their elders, when the Israeli state is not doing that. And that's where I find it much interesting as a whole, because it's just fascinating, this whole dynamic as a whole. Because, as I said here, for example, Chris Minns, the Premier of New South Wales, has himself delivered delivered addresses at Zionist conferences, aligning himself with the Zionist Federation of Australia and the Zionist Council of New South Wales. The federal, state and local Labour parties are complicit with their support for the colonial power. There has bloodied with deaths of over 100 Palestinians this year alone. This has been the worst for our people. The terrorist state commands no respect or celebrations as long as it continues to colonize, occupy, murder, steal land, subjugate the indigenous population, and grow settlement projects. The Labour Party cannot claim they are pro-indigenous rights, yet to claim they support the Israeli regime. They have deliberately chosen time and time again to stand on the side of the colonizer, not the colonized. The oppressor, not the oppressed. At what point will Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims stop supporting that an active player in the oppression of Palestinians? And with that, I am going to head off, as I'm getting a bit tired now and can't continue much longer. But I hope you found this interesting as a